Can anyone guess what it is? It's wheat. One man said to me, "But Barbara, God made wheat." I said, "He did, but not this one." So by the 1990s, in Australia, in New Zealand, every cereal, every bread, every cake, every pie, every pizza, every donut, every biscuit, every pasta, what's it made out of? The hybridised wheat. Now, what happened with this hybridised wheat? I'll just wipe that off. What happened with this hybridised wheat? What was never addressed was the effect on the human body, the effect on the gut. And what this hybridised wheat produced was a type of starch. It's called amylopectin. Amylopectin A is the starch found in this hybridised wheat. Now, amylopectin A gets the blood sugar level up very high, very fast, and you've always get a corresponding dump. Amylopectin B is what's found in bananas and potatoes. And amylopectin B, it gets it up fairly high, not as high, and so you get a drop too, but not as low. You see that? Amylopectin C is what is found in chickpeas, lima beans, legumes, and it gets a nice steady rise and steady drop. Now, because of that amylopectin A, it has a very high reading on the glycemic index. So you're familiar with the glycemic index? Because the glycemic index of foods is how quickly the food breaks down to glucose in the blood. So your baseline for glycemic index is 55. So anything below 55 is low. Anything above 55 is high. Let me give you an illustration. Cherries are 26. In fact, in most of the low-carb books, they advocate the only fruit to eat is blueberries, blackberries, strawberries, cherries, because they're very low on the glycemic index. Sugar, whether it be molasses, whether it be brown, whether it be raw, whether it be white, it has a glycemic index of 59, and we're not surprised. The refined wheat, so that would be white bread, white cereals, cakes made out of white flour, 69. Wow. So that white bread products is higher than sugar. I'm glad you're sitting down because the next information is shocking. Wholemeal. So wholemeal wheat. So that's wholemeal bread, wholemeal pasta, 72. How could that be? How could wholemeal bread get the blood sugar level up quicker and higher than white bread? Well, because it's not refined, it has more of the amylopectin A in it. Can you see that? One lady said, "Are you saying white bread's better than wholemeal?" No. No, I'm not. The problem is the wheat. I presented this one day at our health retreat, and a lady began to cry. I said, "Why are you crying?" She said, "I'm type 2 diabetic. I was diagnosed 2 years ago." She said, "I do everything they tell me. I have wholemeal bread, wholemeal cereal, wholemeal pasta. And every 6 months I visit the doctor and he puts me on more insulin." What's the definition of insanity? To do what you've always done and expect different results. She said, "I'm crying tears of frustration because I do everything that they tell me and I'm getting worse." She said, "I'm crying tears of joy right now because you have just solved the problem." Now, if you want to pursue this a little bit more, there's a book called Wheat Belly by Dr. William Davis. And he will explain this issue in detail. Why is his book called Wheat Belly? Because this blood sugar level that goes up so high under the effect of the amylopectin A in this hybridized wheat very quickly the body's got to do something with that. And what does it do with it? Stores it as fat. He said this amylopectin A, once the blood sugar drops because of the high insulin release, it gets stored on the internal organs, pushing the belly out. But not only that, it's a type of visceral fat that gets stored on the belly. So you got a double whammy of pushing it out. In his book Wheat Belly, Dr. William Davis must say the term wheat belly nearly every page. He has decades of clinical practice up his sleeve. Hundreds of his patients have conquered diabetes and weight gain through dropping of the wheat. Is it that simple? Well, it's part of the equation. But it solves the puzzle. Because Aussies, New Zealanders have been eating sugar for a long time, and sugar doesn't get off the hook. Sugar certainly is a big contributing factor, but something has caused this explosion. And it is the hybridized wheat. There is also a problem with the gluten, because it's produced an incredibly complex gluten. No wonder we have so much gluten intolerance today. You look at the timeline worldwide in the 70s, by the 1990s, all of those foods are made out of this hybridized wheat. When did gluten intolerance appear? Going into the 2000s, when Aussies are starting to actually show the results of this wheat. But you've not only got that, you've got the problem of babies being fed starch too young before they've got their molars to be able to deal with it. Do you know 100 years ago, babies weren't given food? And the first teeth are 4 at the top, 4 at the bottom, and they're called milk teeth, because that's all babies should have. Milk. Then the molars appear where they grind. And when the grinding molars come through, then ptyalin is released in the mouth. And ptyalin is the amylase enzyme that breaks down starch. So with my babies, I gave them no starch until the molars were through. That can be 20 months, even to 2 years. And what are mothers told to give their babies in the first 4-6 months of life? Farax, yeah, pure starch. That's setting up the gluten intolerance. It's setting up gut problems. We're going to go back to the old ways. So many little bits and pieces come together to make us who we are. But the good news is we live in an incredible body that has an amazing ability to heal itself when you give it the right conditions. Last night I told you the story of a couple of people who'd conquered their eczema by stopping the wheat, conquering irritable bowel by stopping the wheat. So many symptoms. I could have an answering service on my phone. Stop the wheat, dairy, refined sugar. Next, stop the wheat, dairy. Is it that simple? Well, it's not quite that simple, but it is a large part of it. You can eat a slice of bread and it'll be out of your body in 24 hours, but the effect can remain for up to 6 weeks, 2 months. And if someone says, well, I've been doing it for 6 weeks and I'm not getting the results, they might say, well, do you have any mold exposure or chemical exposure? They can be exasperating the problem. That's why the detective hat always must go on to find out why these things are so. Newton's third law of motion: to every action there is an equal and an opposite reaction. Now, to allow you to fully digest what I've just presented, because to some it may be quite shocking news. It was certainly quite shocking news when I first looked at it. But I've seen such amazing results. And the books that I've quoted, there's Gut and Psychology by Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride. There's also Stop Autism Now and Stop Alzheimer's Now by Dr. Bruce Fife. There's Grain Brain by Dr. David Pertmuller, and William Davis's book, Wheat Belly. They are all basically saying the same thing. And what does the proverb say? In a multitude of counselors, there's safety. And these people are all coming to the same conclusions, and we find two in our health centre. Yes? Where does spelt flour come in? Spelt is a wild or field hybrid from the original wheat grain. So spelt and kamut, I'll write them up here for you. Spelt, one lady said, how do you spell it? Spelt. And kamut, they are wild or field hybrids of the original wheat. They don't have the amylopectin A, and they do not have the complex protein structure. If someone is celiac, often they can't even handle that. They have to heal that gut first. But even people who are sensitive or intolerant to wheat can usually handle these two. I'm going to give everyone a break now. It is almost 5 to 8. If you could please come back at 8:05, that's a 10-minute break. We will continue our presentation. And out the back here, there are there's big jugs of water with lemon and mint in it. And Amelia, here's Amelia, she will be manning the books and the DVDs out the back. But there's one more question there I'll answer before I go, but the lady's not looking at me. Yes? You had a question. That's a good question, and I'll cover that in our next section. Thank you. Have a good break. Oh, there's one more question, yes? You can get it as spelt and kamut. The original wheat was called enkhorn, which is almost impossible to get now. But these two have wild hybrids from the Emma wheat. So you can put these names into the web and you might find them somewhere. But the spelt and kamut are quite easy to get. And again, they're wild or field hybrids of these original grains. So they're very similar. So we're going to begin looking, or continue, I should say, looking at some of the causes. And what I'd like to write down here is some of the causes of diabetes. And wheat and sugar are big contributing factors. Another contributing factor is dairy. And in the book, The China Study, Dr. Colin Campbell, he explains this one. When a human takes dairy, in the majority of cases, it's difficult to break down because we haven't got the 5 stomachs. And so molecules come into the blood that aren't properly broken down, and the body creates antigens to deal with them. Now, their molecular structure is very similar to the molecular structure of the beta cells in the pancreas. And so these pathogens, they're wiping out these molecules from the partially broken down milk, and then they look over at the pancreas and start to break down the beta cells in the pancreas. I hope I didn't lose you with that one. And so dairy is a big contributing factor. Colin Campbell states that children that have cow's milk in the first year of life have a 70% greater risk of developing type 1 diabetes. And yet, what would most children have for breakfast? Cereal, milk and sugar. That's what I had as a child, yeah? So that's another causative factor. Number 3 is drugs. Many drugs have as their side effect an effect on the beta cells in the pancreas to break them down. There is much research today, and I know a Dr. Glassons from America, he pioneered a lot of this research in about the 80s, that the polio vaccine was causing the type 1 diabetes. That's quite alarming, isn't it? Do you know the health department have put a statement out in the last few days that the only cases of polio around today are from the polio vaccine. Polio was wiped out before vaccines came in. Quite alarming, isn't it? The human body was designed to heal itself, and it'll heal itself if you give it the right conditions. And I had a lady ring me up with a 16-month-old child with diabetes, and she said it developed after her vaccinations. Now, there are children that are vaccinated that don't have diabetes. It's like this really. It's the best way to explain it. A whole lot of little threads come together to make a strong rope, and a strong man cannot break that rope. But a little mouse that strong man could step on and squash can start eating at all those little threads. And the rope that the strong man could not break, that little mouse successfully does by nibbling at those threads. We are a combination of a whole lot of bits and pieces, aren't we? And that's why I believe we should be the doctor. Where to put the detective hat on and thread all of those threads. Another cause of diabetes is the bleach that they bleach flour with. Now flour, or wheat flour, or even spelt flour, kamut flour, if the bran and the wheat germ are taken out, it's almost the colour of the inside of my skin there, like a light beige colour. And so they wanted the wheat or the flour white. So they bleach it with a bleach called alloxin. And alloxin, the research is showing now, kills the beta cells in the pancreas. So another reason why this wheat is contributing to it. And so, number one, to get a turnaround with diabetes is the wheat and the sugar must stop, the dairy must stop, and ideally the drugs stop. Now, some people are on medications that cannot be stopped straight away. Some medications can be stopped straight away, and that's why it is good to get some advice on that. The medications that must not be stopped straight away are things like antidepressants, things like your cortisone drugs. There can be a major reaction if you stop them. What we do at Misty Mountain Health Retreat is we get people to begin implementing lifestyle changes. The body gets strong, the body starts working better, and then they can ease off the medications. That's probably the best way to do it. But if you are on medication, it is good to get advice on how that can be taken off, especially if a person has been on it for years. Tomorrow night when I look at heart health, I'll be directly addressing things like cholesterol-lowering medication, blood thinning medication, and blood pressure medication. So we'll be looking at that tomorrow night. Regarding insulin, what I find when people come to our health retreat, within 38 hours they're having to reduce their medication because their blood sugar levels are going too low. And this young man, Dan, that I told you about, remember I said that every night he'd get a blood sugar level low. Do you know what that meant? He's on too much insulin. By the third week, Dan had reduced, now this is type 1 diabetic, he'd reduced his insulin by 90%. That's in 3 weeks. That's incredible, isn't it? That's so quickly he was getting those results. Now there was something else that he was doing, so we'll put here, eliminate. These are the things that must be eliminated. Is these 3 things here. Now we're going to go over what needs to be implemented, and this is 8 glasses of water a day. Now, some people look at that and feel overwhelmed. In this weather it's not hard though, is it? But in the middle of winter, it's a little bit harder. Now the best way to get that water in is little by little by little. One lady said, I can't drink water, it makes me feel sick. I can't drink water, it bloats me. And then I found out she would drink 500 mils all at once. Now if I have a plant that's a bit dry and I put 500 mils all in at once, what happens? Where does the water go? It all runs down the bottom. But if I come to that dry plant and put a little bit in, and then a bit later a little bit more, I can get 500 mils into that plant without any overflow. So little by little by little. I find it difficult to drink a whole lot of water at once, but I've just got my water bottle always by me. I sip here, I have a little bit more there, I have a little bit more there. I just have it always by me. And you'll be amazed how much water you can get into your body. Have it in the car, have it at the desk, have it in the kitchen, have it out in the garden. Just have it always there, a couple of sips at a time. And there is one way that you can get that water into the cell so that you're not visiting the little house all the time, so that the feet don't swell. I mentioned in that question about the edema, and I'll look at it a little bit more tomorrow, we need to take the whole salt. Now, whole salt, and I'll be looking at this in detail tomorrow night, whole salt is unrefined sea salt. And there's a couple of ways we get it in Australia. One is Himalayan salt, and another is Celtic salt. And Celtic salt is one of my favourites because it has 3 magnesiums in it. And the Celtic salt has 82 minerals. Himalayan salt is very similar. Himalayan salt is certainly better than the refined salt. You know, the refined salt has 2 minerals. And there's a verse in the Bible that talks about the salt. It's Matthew 5:13. It's Jesus speaking. He says, "Ye are the salt of the earth. If the salt hath lost its savour, wherewith shall it be salted? It is henceforth good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden under foot of men." Just think of that when you look at that table salt. Henceforth good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden under foot of men. We use it a little bit at our health retreat for the leeches. Put it on the leech, it gets off. No, we don't have many leeches, only when we have a lot of rain. Good for nothing but the leech. You see, as I'll show you tomorrow night, because it's so imbalanced, it causes this big imbalance in the body. Now, Celtic salt has 3 magnesium, and magnesium pulls the water inside the cell. Remember the CBD? The CBD is where we need that water, and the magnesium pulls it inside the cell. So how do we take the salt? I take a crystal of Celtic salt on my tongue before every glass of water that I drink. Now, I did say I sipped, but every time I start a new glass, I'll put a crystal on my tongue and I'll drink a few mouthfuls, then I'll drink a few more mouthfuls. When I've done a cup, then I'll have another crystal of salt. You see, we are so mineral deficient today because the soils are deficient, the plants are deficient, and if you have a crystal of Celtic salt on your tongue before you drink every glass of water, all you will do is replace the minerals you lost yesterday. Especially do you need it in this hot weather because you are perspiring. Have you ever tasted your perspiration? It's very salty. So you think about it, we're salty people. We need that salt. And that salt allows the water to be taken inside the cell. Now this cell, I'm talking about your pancreatic cells. The pancreas cannot make these hormones to balance the blood sugar levels unless it has adequate minerals. And the best place, the cheapest place, the most effective place is in the salts, because we need the minerals in a way that the body can use them. And because they are in the way that they are found in the body, when you take it, it liquefies and it gets through the membrane of the cell, gets that water inside the cell. It's well documented. It's the quickest way to hydrate a body, is to take that salt. If you were under the impression that salt was bad, and this is news to you, and you're used to no salt, my suggestion is start slowly. Just have the tiniest little bit, because your body, one of the most amazing things about the body is its ability to adapt and adjust. And the body, if your body's had no salt, it has adapted and adjusted to that, and as you'll see tomorrow night, at a cost. But now, if you want it to take the salt, which is a good idea to do because we need those minerals, there'll be a little bit of time getting the body to adapt and adjust back to that. But it is a delicious salt. It's very nice on your food as well, of course. So it's very important to take the salt. Another very important point of conquering diabetes, conquering weight, is exercise. And there is a type of exercise that gets the body up onto a more effective and better rate of running. There is a type of exercise that will stimulate the development of more insulin receptor sites. In a matter of days, you can conquer insulin resistance. Isn't that good news? If you implement the things I'm putting down here. Exercise. What is this interval training? Interval training, as the name implies, are intervals of high intensity and periods of recovery for a cycle. So a lot of the research with this has been done on exercise bikes, because I can testify it's not easy to run for 30 seconds. If you think to yourself, she doesn't know what she's talking about, I want you to try it tomorrow. In fact, at 20 seconds, my body is screaming at me, stop. But the type of exercise that's going to wake up that pancreas, the type of exercise that is going to wake up the insulin receptor sites on the cell and get them moving again, is the type of exercise that's very, very hard work. It's going to get you out of your comfort zone. Now, if you can't run, exercise bike. Can't exercise bike, swim. Can't swim, push-ups. Can't push-ups, push-ups on the wall. Fitboard. You just got to find out what works for you. It may be a good idea to go to a gym and try different pieces of equipment and see what works for you. Then go home and we have Gumtree or eBay in Australia. You can buy second-hand pieces of equipment. But the exercise bike, most people find, is the easiest way to do this high intensity. If you can't do 30 seconds high intensity, start with 10 or start with 15. But remember, don't stop when your body tells you to. You push yourself a little bit more. It's that pushing of yourself that strengthens that heart, and I'll talk about it in detail again tomorrow night. But it's that pushing of yourself that's going to waken up the insulin receptor sites on the cell, and he's going to wake up that pancreas. Now, Dan told me that his doctor told him his pancreas was dead. 20. I said, is it gangrene? What's dead? If there's blood and if there's lymph going through that pancreas, there's life, and there is the ability to revive. The fact that he dropped his insulin by 90% by the 3rd week is an indication of what's starting to work. The pancreas. He adjusted it according to his blood sugar levels. They kept going lower and lower, so he'd go less, and that's how you do it. 30 seconds high intensity, 90 seconds recovery for about a cycle of 6. If at first you can't do a cycle of 6, do a cycle of 3. You just got to start with where you're at. Dr. Al says in his book PACE, his PACE means progressive acceleration of cardiopulmonary exertion. You don't have to repeat that back to me. Progressive, that means what you can't do now, you'll be able to do in a few days. Have you done the maths on that? Impressive, isn't it? What's this, 10 minutes a day? I'm a busy lady. I love it. I used to do 2K half-hour walk. Now I do 15 minutes. That's all I do. But I incorporate the high intensity. You got to work and work hard. And when Dan came back from his morning walk, his clothes were wet, and he was like this. This is working hard. What sort of effort do you think the Olympian athletes put into their training? They put everything into it. Now, we're training for something more important than the Olympic Games, you know that. We're training for life. We're training for quality of life. And what you do to your body now will determine how you spend those latter years. And each one of us have the opportunity that our latter years will be comfortable, will be enjoyable. Isn't that what God meant? God never ever designed for people to suffer for the last 20 years of their life and then pass away. And to the point where the passing of the way is a great blessing because they are in so much suffering. He never meant for people to be on huge amounts of medication in the latter years of their life. No. And as I'll show you on Saturday morning, God never meant the brain to deteriorate. Brains and bodies are deteriorating far too young. And remember, drugs never cure disease. They only change the form and location of the disease. The body is the only thing with the ability to heal you and I. And it will if you give it the right conditions. So the exercise is a very important part. Your fitness is not determined by how hard and fast you can go, but how long you take to recover. So if your first high intensity requires you 4 minutes recovery time, that's all right. It's not going to stay like that. Age has nothing to do with this. Got that? Age has nothing to do with it. Do you know the trainers today for the athletes are finding that this interval training is so effective? You'll find they're all doing it. And it also means you only need to do 15 minutes instead of an hour jog. You can get more out of a 15 minutes high intensity than an hour jog. And I don't know many people that have got that hour. I got too much to do. I just love it because I run out the door, and when I get, well, Amelia and I, we dive in the creek every morning after we've done it, and we need to because we're hot. Sometimes we need to take a change of clothes when we get out of the creek. And often I'll do my last high intensity in the creek, swimming against the tide. Once you start doing this, the feeling that you will get from it is so good. Your mind will be sparkier. Every cell in the body starts to work more effectively. And guess what starts getting burnt? Oh, it got rubbed out. Those fat cells. And that's one of the reasons why it's so effective in weight loss. It's incredibly effective with diabetes because of the stimulation of more receptor sites, more insulin receptor sites, because of the stimulation of the pancreatic cells, the beta cells that make the insulin to revive. But when you're starting to do that morning exercise program and your glycogen stores get used up, where does the body going to go now for fuel? It goes to the fat cells. So exercise is essential. Every day, I do it every day. I never miss. I've got an appointment. It's a little bit different here because of the time change, but at home, I usually wake at 5, I usually walk at 6, and I eat at 7. That's my appointment. I have an appointment. And you know, when we make an appointment, we've got to keep that appointment, don't we? That's the easiest way to do it. But I have known many people that have had incredible change in their life through this. And recently I was shown the value of this because sometimes I only do 3 high intensities because I just haven't got enough time. And I was in Georgia, in America, about 4 months ago. And I was talking to a young man and he wanted to pick my brains. And I said, I'm free tomorrow afternoon. He said, I've got to do a mountain climb. Do you want to come? I said, yeah. Now, the guy he was walking with couldn't come. He said, do you still want to do it? I said, yeah. So he's picking my brains the whole time. Now, we're walking like this, an hour and a half. Now, I pushed myself because I didn't want to hold him up. And every now and then I said, let's look at the view for a while. How long do you take to recover? Until your breathing and your heart rate settles down again, and then you can go it again. But I really did push myself. And it was winter, and it was cold, and my clothes were wet. And it's not easy. I don't perspire easily. Coming down was a lot easier, but we got lost. And so we were battling through the bush. We finally got home. I'm glad it's winter because the leaves were off the trees and you could see through the bush. I got home and had the best shower I think I've ever had. And I thought to myself, I am going to be sore tomorrow. Not one bit of soreness. I couldn't believe it. Not one bit of soreness. And I thought, this is incredible. Sometimes I'm only 15 minutes in the morning. And yet that sort of training gets the body up onto a far more efficient and effective rate of running. So exercise, not negotiable. Again, if you're not fit, and you find it difficult, just do what you can, but push yourself a little bit more every day. Your heart will get stronger, your lungs will start working better, and when your lungs work better, what are you going to get more of? Oxygen. The Framingham Heart Study, very famous study, it's been done over 30 years, 25,000 people, so it's often quoted. It found that by the age of 50, people had lost 40% lung capacity. That's a bit scary. By the age of 80, 60% lung capacity has been lost. So 40% lung capacity is lost. Does that mean 40% of the cells can't get down to here? They can only run up here? How much energy is that going to give you? So what can you do to prevent lung capacity loss? Interval training. What can you do to regain it? Interval training. How many people from about sadly 40 up get scared when their body goes, you got to do that. That's how you retain it. And that's how you also retain your abdominal breathing. Abdominal breathing gets more oxygen into the cells. And as you can see, that's all we need, more oxygen. It's the most vital element needed for life. You just got to move. You've got to move fast. You've got to push yourself till you think you're dying. Did you hear that?